So, hello everyone here in Homer and in the Zoom world. We're all excited to have you here tonight. Thanks for battling the roads and whatever it was necessary to get here. I'm going to start with a little introduction, get going before everybody might be still logging on, but I'd love to see that different parts of the state are being represented. So thanks for posting on chat your location as you come in. A quick Zoom reminder, use the little options bar along the bottom of your screen. Make sure that your mic is muted unless you plan to talk. Feel free to turn on the captions if you want to have things clear. And feel free to keep it lively with little reaction icons from your thing if you'd like. And please use the chat anytime to ask questions. We're monitoring it, and so we'll let the let me know if you have any questions. And do keep in mind that we are recording. So what are some of the locations that have been coming through, Vic?
We've got Strelna in the Rainbow Mountains, Seward, Fairbanks, and Soldana so far.
Ooh.
And Wasilla.
Okay, for those of you who may not have much experience with conservation districts, let me give you a brief description of who we are. The concept of soil and water conservation districts were born out of the Dust Bowl when the nation's soil was blowing away, and Congress was trying to convince farmers to start using soil conservation techniques. As some form of saving their farms. Well, at the time, in the Great Depression, the people were pretty fed up with the feds, so the states started their own local conservation districts. And we act as a go-between that can take federal programs, explain them, and offer up what's happening at the federal level to the locals. And then we take what the locals and farmers need and translate that to the feds and tell them what our local priorities are and what they should be concerned about for our area. So Homer Soil and Water, we have a board of local landowners. We work very closely with USDA and NRCS, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and other agencies that we help them bring their programs to our local landowners and make sure these agencies know what our local landowners need down here on the peninsula. But not every place in Alaska does have a soil conservation service, but many locations are represented by tribal conservation districts, which function similarly. So it's always good to find out who works in your region. It's always good to know your district. It's also always good to know your land, which is what the motivation for this lecture series is. Whether your ancestors are here or you just moved up from Georgia, knowing the best way to work in and on the ground with natural systems is a total secret to success. So every Thursday at 6 p.m. through the middle of April, we're going to be hosting these Alaska-specific discussions and presentations. Next week, our talk is January 16th. Low Tunnels 101. So as we get started here, keep in mind, keep your mic muted if you're online. Feel free to keep it lively and use the chat, and that we are recording. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about high tunnels. My name is Kyra Wagner. I'm the district manager of Homer Soil and Water Conservation District. If you're considering getting a high tunnel, hopefully we'll give you some tips and tricks that will make you help you make the most beneficial decisions for your farm. For those of you on Zoom, if you haven't heard already, please continue putting in your location and questions. But first of all, I have some questions for you. So how many, for those of you online, you can give a thumbs up or a reaction button from the bottom of your screen. But how many of you already have a high tunnel? How many of you are just in the planning stages of getting a high tunnel? Okay, and how many of you are on the fence about getting a high tunnel? A little bit of everybody. All right, perfect. Okay, so here on the Kenai Peninsula, high tunnels are well known, but just for basic clarification, when I say a high tunnel, we're referring to hoop houses that are designed to extend the season. Here in Alaska, this form of controlled climate agriculture also gives us the opportunity to extend our climate, not just our season. So it gives us the opportunity to grow different kinds of vegetables that would otherwise be impossible. So today we'll go over how to go about getting one, what the characteristics are to pay attention to, and what methods to use once it's up and running. First of all, how to get a high tunnel. Isn't there someone out there who's giving away free high tunnels? Well, that's the rumor. There are two ways to get a high tunnel: buy one or build one. That's it. There are no free high tunnels. I just want to make sure that's really clear from the beginning. The fact that you can buy one online and have it shipped here, you can order one from someplace like Kenai Feed and Supply. They carry Remo high tunnel brands. You might be able to find a used one. You can buy a pipe vendor and you can build one yourself. You can hire someone to help you do it or to do it for you. Or in the case of Kenai Feed, you can pay the extra price for installation and they can do that as part of the original purchase. If you do it yourself, do remember to take the precautions necessary. These buildings aren't usually very dainty. So lots of things to take into consideration. But it depends on how you design it. If you're going to make one, you can get the basic supplies at hardware stores anywhere, Home Depot, whichever. If you want it light, you can use PVC. You can use electrical metal conduit. It doesn't have to be super bulky. If you want it bigger and you want it sturdier, using something like the chain link fence posts that they sell at Home Depot, chain link fence rail is perfect. If you have a pipe bender, you can create whatever size or shape you'd like. You can buy it, you can borrow it. Pipe vendors are around. We have access to them at the Homer Soil Water office. If you want different sizes, you can look around. It's true that NRCS does have funding that can go towards your new high tunnel, but remember, nothing's free. So NRCS programs are designed to incentivize farmers to have good practices on their farm. Remember what I was saying about the Dust Bowl? Their programs are still set up exactly the same way. They're incentivizing farmers to do good practices on their farm. So you have to have an established farm with Farm Service Agency, FSA. That's one form you'll have to fill out, and there are many. But you have to have grown on the prospective site ahead of time as well. You can't just go in there and say, all right, I want a high tunnel. You have to have the space has got to be productive already. You'll need a site visit from them and plenty of other forms of paperwork. But the basic idea is that you're creating with them a plan for your farm. So NRCS will help you address what they call resource concerns on your property and around your farm. So everything from erosion to water scarcity issues or irrigation problems, soil quality problems, that's what they want to address. And they have various forms of incentives, the high tunnel being one of them, that they can reimburse you for a portion of the cost of having initiated a practice to solve the problem. So yes, these practices do have incentive money, and that incentive money tied to it changes every year. So there's lots of considerations for being eligible for the program. You have to buy the high tunnel new. You can't borrow or build one and get reimbursed for it. You have a lot of specific specs that you have to go along with. For example, the site has to be leveled to less than 5% grade. So if you live on a hill, it's probably not going to work for you. If this is something you're interested in, it's really just best to go to the NRCS office before you start the process so that you can get the whole thing started. Don't just show up and ask for reimbursement for putting up a high tunnel, but the opportunity to get funding to help support a farm, I'm always in favor of that and always encourage everyone to look into it. So does everybody know where their closest NRCS office is? It's nodding here. We're getting thumbs up online. Our folks online might need to remember the NRCS office. It's always good to know your NRCS office. But regardless of how you got your high tunnel, the most important things are the things right up front. You can have your high tunnel and be using it for years and years if you make good decisions up front. So when you Google high tunnel, you'll see lots of options to choose from. From the start, identify your goals. Do you want to grow tomatoes and peppers? then you can get one that's built lighter and you can take the top off. Because you're only gonna be growing during the sunny months of the year, right? If you want carrots in June, then you're gonna have to heat up your soil a lot earlier. So you're gonna have to have your top on a lot earlier. So therefore, you're gonna wanna be your high tunnel. It's gonna have to have plenty of reinforcing and it's gonna be able to withstand snow load. What is your site like? If you are in a heavy snow, if you're in a heavy snow area, you may prefer the Gothic shape. It has more of a peak in the middle that sheds snow better. But if you're in a windy zone, the Quonset shape that is just rounded, that doesn't have as much pull. Like wind, I've actually seen the wind pick up high tunnels that were Gothic shape. So if you're on Kodiak or you're in Palmer, the suggestions are maybe you want to use a Quonset hut shaped one instead. So think about your environment. How will it be constructed? If you're building it yourself, that little tomato tunnel isn't going to be too hard. But if you want a burly high tunnel, then hiring help might be your only option. All right, important parts of the high tunnel. There's lots of things to take into consideration when it comes to building it. You want to make sure that it doesn't fill up with water. So if you are building in an area that's got wetlands around it or has drainages around it, make sure that you have drainage ditches around your high tunnel. If you want to make sure that you have room around the edges to clear snow in the wintertime, then you have to take that into consideration when it's not going to be a small footprint, you're going to need a bigger footprint. If you're in a really wet or windy area, you may want to put foundation posts deeper into the ground, and then maybe even use some kind of anchors to keep your entire building from flying away. Keep your tunnel tied down. How do you want to enter your tunnel? Do you want to enter it with a tractor? Do you just need a man door? All of those kind of things are important to know before you even build your first end wall. Skirting. A lot of people put hard solid skirting around the bottom. If you're in an area that's going to heave a lot and those skirting panels are tied to your post, you can jack up your whole high tunnel. So do take frost heaving and things like that into consideration for your high tunnel skirting. If you are going to keep it up or keep your top on during snow load times, you're going to need a lot of bracing and rafters that are of thick enough gauge to deal with that weight. For example, some of the common gauge, like the Remall, is a little bit smaller than the Oregon Valley. They've got a thicker gauge metal. So you can make your decision before you even buy the high tunnel as to how you're going to use it. All right, so that's already a lot just thrown at you. But after you make all the decisions about your construction, now you have to make the decisions about management. So you've created the perfect high tunnel for your needs, but long-term, you can be devastated by management issues. So it's important to know what these are up front. Big overarching message here is that this is controlled climate agriculture. You are controlling the climate. So it can be complicated. You need to think about your water source. There's no rain in there. So how is that going to get utilized in your high tunnel? Do you pump it up to a black tank and it gets heated up throughout the day and you're pouring warm water into your plants? They'll love you for it, but you're going to have to design that in and make room for it when you're making your plan. You can have irrigation with emitters, but those emitters require filters. What kind of water will you be feeding into your irrigation system? All of those are things to think about as far as irrigation. Humidity in your high tunnel, it can cause mold issues, can cause heat stress, it can kill your plants. So do you buy a fancy box fan or one with louvers that are automatic, or do you buy just roll down sides for your ventilation? Do you build vents into your end walls with heat activated louvers, like the one that's shown in the picture there, so that you don't have to actively open and close doors? It does it automatically every day. Or would you rather just go hang out with your plants every day? So you're going to be opening the doors and it doesn't matter. All of these things are things to consider. There's winter management. Do you take your top off every fall and let the snow flush and kill your pests? or do you keep it on and shovel snow all winter? Do you decide to, if you decide to keep the top on in the winter, do you use one layer of plastic, or do you use 2 layers of plastic that you can then fill up with air so that the snow slides off easier? Or do you just invest in fancy bubble wrap that you can slide on and put onto your high tunnel, makes it super strong, insulated, but a little bit more pricey, or even more pricey is Lexan plastic. Is that what you're going to choose to put on your high tunnel? So there's various options that can insulate better or be stronger. Which one is within your price range and fits and isn't overkill for what you're going to do. If you're just doing the tomatoes and peppers greenhouse, you don't need all of these fancy things. But do you buy a propane heater to force a big dump of snow off of that greenhouse if you've just got a layer of plastic? Or are you ready to go out there and slash your plastic if your high tunnel looks like it's in danger of collapsing? I can't stress enough how important these winter considerations are. A crop failure is one thing, but a high tunnel failure is a whole nother deal. Your plastic will hold a great deal of weight, and it will pull down your high tunnel if it's not strong enough. I will always advise folks personally to take off their tops in the winter time. It takes a couple of hours of work in the fall and the spring, but that's nothing compared to the work that it takes all winter to maintain it. And as well as just the heartbreak if it fails. So there are 2 theories that I want to talk about or discuss with winterizing high tunnels if you want to keep your top on safely. And there's ideas, myths about how you can save your high tunnel, and I want to spell these. One is putting a support post underneath your high tunnel ridge line. We've seen this, and we've seen high tunnels like that collapse. When you stop the central top beam of your high tunnel from bending in, they're designed to be flexible. And so as soon as you make that rigid, all other aspects of the engineering collapse. And so we've seen them where they'll just pop in to the side of whatever was built up there. So having a strong support post in a flexible building doesn't actually work. Clearing the sides versus leaving snow to build up. I've seen it work both ways. I've seen people swear by either one and still lose their high tunnel. So if you clear the snow from the sides, then the snow from the top can fall down. And so sometimes that works, and it might just be dependent on your area, how warm it is, what the heaviness of the snow is, all of that kind of thing. If you leave the sides, if you're in a coastal region like Homer, often if you leave snow at the sides, it'll freeze and thaw enough that becomes a stabilizing force that holds it so that as that building bends, it leans up against that and doesn't collapse. But again, then you have a rigid structure with a soft structure, so it's not a guarantee. So that's these questions in this area are one reason why I like to encourage people just take your top off if you can. If you want carrots in June, though, consider taking your top off for the first part of winter, and then put it on in like February, end of February or March. We're getting plenty of sunlight at that time, so your high tunnel will have the ability to heat up on its own inside and slough off some of that, and you'll be heating your soils. Keeping the top on in the dead of winter when there's no light to heat this high tunnel doesn't actually keep your high tunnel any warmer anyway, so there's no use for it. I have seen amazing air circulation methods where they bring in hot air in the high tunnel down to the soil, or even use actual wood boiler systems to heat the soil. If you go that far, probably aren't going to have to worry about taking your top off because everything will be so warm inside, the snow will be melting off. But these are all easier to install and set up when everything's in the construction phase instead of after you've created it. Some of these ground heating systems, air circulation systems, are actually embedded in the soil below the plants. So that's easier to do when you have the bare space before you put the building on it, and you can use a tractor and things to install those. So think about the lifestyle you want with your controlled climate agriculture and how you're going to want to work it, and that way you can figure out the best way to line up your high tunnel. The last two things on this list have to do with long range management as well. You need to control the input of your soil, make sure your plants are healthy so they can fight the pests that will inevitably show up. During construction, it's good to think about the best way to build your soils. Do you need to bring in supplemental additives to make your soil better? It's much easier to plow it in before the high tunnel is actually put over the top of it than it is once you get it all put in. Then you're carrying things in bags. So much easier to do that early soil prep and get some of it done then. Pest management, taking off your high tunnel can be one of your high tunnel top can be one of the best methods of pest management. A lot of the pests that we get in high tunnels are the kind of pests that were brought in on your potted plants that you got at the nursery or at Home Depot. They aren't necessarily acclimated for our climate, but they do really well in a high tunnel. So if you take off your high tunnel top in the wintertime, you'll freeze those critters out and you won't have as much of a problem with that. Something to consider. Again, the thing to keep in mind is the difference between indoor growing and outdoor growing. High tunnels can get you much warmer because they hold in the heat, but they're not insulated to keep out the cold. So in these two graphs, looks like a lot of squiggly lines, but the red lines are high temps and the blues are low. The darker version of the colors is indoors and the lighter color is outdoors. So let's just look at the hot temps in the high tunnel. Those red, the high temps, the red ones. The hot temps in the high tunnels are clearly above outside temperatures, but the cold often are correlating. If your humidity in the high tunnel is high, you can actually create an environment where high tunnel is colder than it is outside. That effect usually shows up in the morning after a long evening of no sun. There are tons of aspects of controlled climate growing like this that we may not even know yet. Like this is one study. There's lots of things we haven't studied. So it's still a fairly new kind of agriculture. So where exactly is the learning manual that we can go with? There are plenty of people with experience to look to. Find out who has one in your area specifically. There's no reason to make mistakes in isolation. There's plenty of these out there. This is an example of a website, akhightunnels.org. There's some basic information like what we've been talking about today, but it all comes from experience. Pardon me, technical issue. Just to show it. Let's see in my comparison. There we go. Sorry about that. I just lost my view here. Let's see. This is one of my favorite sources of crowdsourcing information from people that have experience. Facebook pages like Homer High Tunnel Growers page. It's grown well beyond Homer and it has thousands of members now. It's a perfect place to share photos and stories, search for information on a topic. For example, if you go up into the search bar on Facebook and put in Homer High Tunnel Growers fruit trees, you will see all the posts over the years about fruit trees. So it is an excellent archive of information very specific to a topic that you might want to look up. There are pages out there now for many regions around the state, like there's Kodiak Growers page, there's Alaska Farm and Food. So reach out, ask questions, know your land, and grow. That is all I have for this evening. Do you have any questions?
I have a question in the chat. What about using high tunnels to expand hydroponic farming operations?
Awesome. Yes, we actually had a hydroponic high tunnel here at Homer. Again, it kind of depends on how you're going to use it. If you want to grow year round, you're going to have to install lights and you're going to have a heating system that, especially with hydroponics, you don't want that water ever freezing. So you need to keep it warm all year, anytime you're growing. So if you want to do year round, it's going to be a lot more intensive, a lot more expensive. And it would be interesting to compare growing in a insulated Quonset hut in Alaska in the wintertime with heaters and lights versus a uninsulated high tunnel to keep those things warm. But in the summertime, yes, it's absolutely, it happens, it's done. Like Old Harbor, Kodiak, they have an amazing high tunnel, couple of high tunnels full of hydroponics, and it works just great. There's no reason not to. Any other questions?
We have a question about certification on the hydroponic farms. Is that an issue on the peninsula?
Certification.
I'm not sure.
Do you want to unmute your mic and explain it?
Yeah, Cliff, go ahead and unmute if you want to ask your question about.
Yeah,
certification.
so I mean, I have a small operation that's indoors right now, so we're looking to expand into the back area. You know, we have a large paved area, so we have a small greenhouse there right now that we started expanding into. So so when you're talking about like you have to be growing already on the property. Pardon?
If we're not getting your audio in here, so maybe if you want to type out an explanation in the chat.
Okay.
Anybody else have any other plans? Anything you
I
want
can-
to throw at
I
me
can
so I
hear
can
'em.
tell you all of the ways I've seen that manifest for good or bad?
If somebody wants to partner with the NRCS to do the high tunnel program, what is the time frame between the initial walk-in where you're actually assembling?
That's a great question. And you'll find that anytime you ask a specific question like that, that seems so easy, and you ask it about NRCS, it'll get a really complicated answer. So it kind of depends on what time of the year you apply. They have batching periods where they look at applications and then they see how much money they have and they put them in order according to when they came in and they run a batch. And then they'll get some more funding and they'll run another batch, you know, so they don't have specific deadlines. But my rule of thumb is to just have go in, plan, like if you plan to put in next year, go in this year. The reason it can take a long time is because when you're applying for it and you're waiting for the information and then they need to see your site and they can't just check it out in the wintertime to have proof that things are growing there and things like that. So they're going to have to visit your place in the summer. So if you start at the end of one summer and they go out and they see your place and you're working on paperwork through the winter, it could happen that you get pre-approval in time to put it in the next summer. It is a reimbursement only program. So you have to buy the high tunnel and you have to set it up and then you call them out and you say, see, I got it up. And so once it's been approved and it has been shown that it is standing, then you can get a reimbursement. And they work on all that contract information with you, so you know exactly how much money is coming towards you, so you don't overspend or under, you know, whatever. So I will say right now, there's a program called Act Now. So they've put a little bit higher priority in high tunnels in Alaska since they're so popular here. If you are only doing the high tunnel practice, like you don't want to worry about irrigation, you don't want to look at incentives for nutrient management, you don't want to look at anything else, and you just go in for a high tunnel, they can process you cleaner and clearer with that. That is usually best if you've already gone in there and got a project started with them and they got all your information and you just want to add a high tunnel. I think that's what that's kind of designed for, because then you can go in and just add a high tunnel and it doesn't take so long. But yeah, I wish that Emily was here tonight. She's our local NRCS lead down here. And but today is federal holiday, so she wasn't allowed to come on work hours here. But yeah, Emily, the folks down there can give you more specifics. That's a good question. I would give time leeway.
Cliff had a great clarification. He's wondering about certifying from NRCS. So will NRCS certify like a high tunnel for the cost share program if you're planning to use it for hydroponics?
Dang, Cliff, that's a great question, and I want to say no. It's got to be in the ground growing. So one of the interesting politics behind this program and it getting started was that nurseries were like, we don't want competition. So it had to be shown that you weren't just growing a whole bunch of potted plants to compete with the nurseries and start your own nursery. So these are designed to be season extending for a farmer, and that's it. So they want to make sure that you're growing in the ground. That's one of those little factors that if you are thinking about, for example, I've seen this happen. People think I'm going to make all raised beds that are 4 feet high, so I won't have to bend over, and that'll be great. And you can, but you have to have soil all the way down to the ground because it's got to be in contact with the soil. So you can't build anything raised beds, and hydroponics would therefore not be eligible for an NRCS high tunnel. So that's another reason why, if you are ever even considering NRCS, make your plans, go in and check it out first so that you don't waste your time or over budget for assuming you're going to get some aid and you're not going to. So yeah, great question, Cliff, and great example.
Emily was really helpful. I talked to her last month and it's like, yeah, it's at least a year and then potentially to the next season. So like a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I wasn't in a hurry anyway, so that's fine. But it was nice to have that clarification and like, you know, that there's steps.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's not a quick process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I encourage people to go talk to NRCS tomorrow regardless. Just because it is about a farm plan. It's about like, what do you want to do with your entire farm? You know, and what are the things, the incentive programs that they have along the way that could be helpful? And so, yeah, if you go in there just looking for a high tunnel, I've seen so many people get disappointed. And so, if you start now though, and then like, even if you have a high tunnel and you've already built it, but they can help you with irrigation, they can help you with nutrient management, you know, things like that. So, there are incentives that they still can help you out with, but you have to get that process going. So better start now if you want to tap into it. So I'm glad to hear that. Any other questions? Okay, so far.
You mentioned something about a 5% grade,
Yeah.
or tell me more about the hills.
Yeah. So high tunnels are really engineered for Iowa. And so they are those flexible buildings and all that. It is designed for flat ground. So when you start putting things on a slope, you knock things out of whack as far as the engineering goes. That's why they want you to buy an approved high tunnel, but they want you to put it on a new and approved patch of Iowa. So what you do is you can cut into your hillside, flatten out the zone where your high tunnel is going to be, and then let the slope continue. But that flat zone can't have more of a slope than 5%.
Demi-walls to.
Yeah. Overall. So for example, if you put your high tunnel along the contour, so it's 72 feet long, but it's only 20 feet wide, you only have 20 feet to worry about that 5% grade, and then it can't be 5% grade the length of the.
If you can build up the lower side instead of cutting in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I did that with my high tunnel, built up the bottom, cut down the top, and made it even, yeah, exactly.
We have a question about, could you speak to the different zoning laws in Alaska and how that determines if you can or cannot have a high tunnel, if you know anything about that?
I certainly do. Oh my gosh, it's such a fun question. So, yes, zoning laws. If you are in town, and we do have people that have built them in town, if your neighbors complain and say that you have a structure that's not allowed, there's two reasons I've heard that claimed. One is it's a permanent structure and it's too big. So we've had people who found lawyers that convinced them it was a temporary structure. We've had neighborhoods that were like, they put up too big of a temporary structure. And we've had people find lawyers that said it's not a temporary structure. So I've seen the battle go both ways, but I've seen battles. So it is really good to find out what the covenants in your neighborhood are or the rules in your area. If you want to play that game, you can put in, I've seen people put in cement foundations for their posts. And that does make it a more permanent structure. So you're more easily can defend it as a permanent structure if you're in town, and that's what you need. If you need it to be a temporary structure, then make sure that you can show that those pipes can come right out of the ground. But yeah, it is always good to make sure that you're not blocking anybody's view or making anybody annoyed in your neighborhood, because that is a common battle I've heard, and I have seen high tunnels come down because of it. So very good consideration to make. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions? What is everybody planning to, what is the management style you're thinking about doing in your high tunnel?
I'm debating between a higher and low tunnel right now.
Ah,
So
right.
that's where I'm at. So I'm gonna come to next week's talk too.
Yes, high tunnels and
Um,
low tunnels.
We're gonna be dealing with a couple of big challenges, which is high volumes of snow and high winds.
Ah,
So
right.
low tunnels might be better, but I was kind of curious to see just like what the shapes and ideas were for the high tunnels. So
Yeah.
we'll see what I decide.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, so much of it is how you want to use it. It's what you can get away with, definitely. And how you want to use it.
That's kind of the first thing I think is being realistic.
Yeah.
Because we had really high winds last night,
Yeah.
like probably would have torn a really good high tunnel down. So
Right.
I'm kind of rethinking how, and the location isn't really negotiable, so I can put up a wind barrier to an extent, but at some point it's is it realistic?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I'm more flexible on like what I want to do with it once it's in. It's more of a just figuring out what structure will fit in the space.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. So there's one kind of high tunnel, they're called caterpillar tunnels. You guys heard of those? They typically don't have end walls. Just take the plastic and pull it so it looks like a big Tootsie Roll. And they are lower. Like you can have a high tunnel that's 16 feet high at the peak. These are often like 8, maybe max 10 feet tall. And again, really easy to take the plastic off. But you use ropes over the top of the high tunnel plastic. And so, and then you can manually lift the plastic on the sides for ventilation underneath those ropes and just bundle them up under the ropes. Googling caterpillar tunnels might be another thought. Those are not paid for through the NRCS high tunnel program, but those are a good option. And those, like, I know people who have grown tomatoes professionally and they prefer those medium height high tunnels versus the big high tunnels because it holds all that heat really close to the plants. And yet you can ventilate it well enough that you don't scorch them. And then of course, low tunnels, yeah, another option. I'll save that for next time. Perfect.
We have a question in the chat. Looking at that temperature chart showing that the high tunnels don't keep cold out when temperatures drop, with as chilly as the temperatures get at night here on the southern part of the peninsula, do the vast majority of gardeners heat their high tunnels in the summer months at night? Or is there success with produce like tomatoes and peppers without heat?
Oh, good question. Yes, there's definitely success without heat. One of the things about sun is that that is the sole heater of our high tunnels. And in the summertime, you have a lot of it. So you don't actually get that dark cold. There are people who will heat their high tunnels at those shoulder seasons, just to make sure that a fluke frost doesn't come in and kill all their tomatoes. That's always a possibility. So it's always good to be ready. One of the aspects of the sun heating up that soil is that then you have a thermal bank, and it's and your soil will heat up your high tunnel overnight. So unless you're on the shoulder seasons where your soil is not warm, you're pretty safe having the sun heat your high tunnel during the day, and a short nights aren't a big deal. Good question. Of course, there is the issue of when summers like we had a couple of years ago where there was no sun. And that greatly affected production. Like people who are used to growing tomatoes, which are sun loving and heat happy, yeah, that made it a lot harder. So that is a consideration, is to be flexible, adjusting to your year. If it looks like it's going to be a sunless year, then no, you're not going to have those hot crops, or you're not going to have success. Diversity is always the answer to that. Make sure you plant a little bit of anything and everything to make sure that you're not too dependent on any one crop. But yeah.
Someone is looking to replace the high tunnel, like the plastic film on their existing tunnel. Is there a good source for this so as to not pay exorbitant freight?
Great. I like that Freudian fright. Yes.
Freight costs.
Yes. Oh, that's a really good question. Most people I know down here, a lot of people have gotten it through Remall just because they can get it through Kenai Feed and Supply. I'm gonna talk about another program. Whenever you're doing high tunnels, it's a big influx of funding into your farm. Get your farm certified with FSA. And FSA has a program, so even if you're not doing an NRCS high tunnel, this is great for anybody that has is buying food for their chickens. It doesn't matter. Get yourself certified as a farm with FSA. They have a program every fall where it's called the Reimbursement Transportation Cost Reimbursement Program. The acronym's not right.
RTCP.
RTCP. Anyway, that's one thing about federal programs. There's always an acronym involved, but the Reimbursement Transportation Cost Program will give you like 25% of your shipping costs back to you. They recognize that Alaskan farmers are shipping things like crazy and we have a disadvantage compared to the other farmers in the lower 48. So they will actually compensate you according to your receipts with what they calculate. And it's not exactly 25%, but it's pretty close. So really worthwhile. If you ship something up here, you can get 25% off the shipping. If you buy something here already, like even if you bought it through Kenai Feed and Supply and you take those receipts in, they will give you a portion of that cost, total cost, just because they recognize that had shipping added onto it. So anything, if you buy a shovel at Ulmer's, you can get that receipt taken care of. So that is a really important thing when you're doing these big infrastructural additions to your farm. Take advantage of that program. So that's not a solid answer, but it's the best I can do. I don't know. That would be a great question though for Facebook crowdsourcing. And that's one of the things about Facebook crowdsourcing, those specific questions, is that like I used to know who had the cheapest, but they're not even in business anymore. So I'm not sure who it is now, who would be the best, but if you were to crowdsource that question, somebody might have just bought one and could give you some details. I was just talking with a coworker of mine this morning and he's priced out every nut and bolt all the way from the beginning of the pipe bending, the plastic and everything. He's got a price for a 60 by 20 high tunnel. You make the pipe. So if anybody wants that, crowdsource it. You can get that kind of information out. Question. Any other questions?
Is the high tunnel program still a 5-year hitch?
Yep, 5-year commitment. You have to keep it up for 5 years. And since you're committing to that, do think about that if you're planning on moving or you're planning on selling or anything like that. Definitely think about your lifestyle. Well, pop up the little schedule for this month. Low tunnels next week and irrigation water management the next week. Monica Kopp will be talking about low tunnels. She's got a farm here in town. She works at Homer Sloan Water as well. And then irrigation, water and water management, that will be with Jesse from NRCS, right? So he actually designs irrigation systems for NRCS programs. So he'll be able to answer all kinds of questions for you. And then the last one of the month, we like to highlight a farmer. So Hannah with Up Yonder Farm will be talking about what she's doing. So you can plug in and see what she's got. Alrighty, if there are no more questions, we'll close it down. Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.